Welcome to the Real Talk with Megan podcast, where we have candid conversations about the things that matter most. I'm your host, Megan, and we're going to deep dive into the topic of mental health. Together, we'll work to destigmatize mental health and start conversations. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready for a real and raw conversation about mental health on the Real Talk with Megan podcast. Today, I have an awesome guest for you, and Brian is here. And Brian, you want to just introduce yourself a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. I do have like my little pitch that I always say. I'm going to try not to be totally robotic. I am an author in the mental health space, the owner and author of Get Out of Your Head. And that's a brand and a book series that seeks to help folks overcome anxiety and depression. So I guess a little more background, right, is I come to this space from personal experience. I got into this space from personal experience. I've dealt with a lot of anxiety in my own life and depression as well. And I think what was most interesting to me, right, was like understanding that like you can have an impact on your own mental health. So even though I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I knew that I could read a lot of books about mental health and I could listen to podcasts and consume journal articles and that sort of thing. So from an early age, because I couldn't find the information that I wanted to find, I was like, I'm going to go out and try to find it and, uncover or turn over a bunch of stones and see where I come up with. So I didn't necessarily plan to like become an author, but eventually got there, right? I think I had uncovered enough information for myself and helped myself a good amount. And also just like, in talking to a lot of people who suffer from these same sorts of things, I wanted to contribute to the space and just help people with some of the information that I had discovered for myself. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's funny enough, that's kind of how I got into mental health and becoming a counselor is because of my own struggles that I dealt with and growing up and not having the resources and feeling like you're alone and you don't have those things. So wanting to be able to start conversations with people. That's why we're doing this podcast too. So I think we're going to have a lot in common in some of these discussions. So I'm excited about jumping in. And so we're just going to really jump all the way in. You kind of hit on it. You battled with anxiety and depression yourself. And so can you take us back to like a moment when you realized like something had to change? I know you talked about you had to go find the information and those kind of things, but what got you to that point? Where did that happen?
Yeah, I tell this story a lot, both in my first book and on other podcasts that I appear on. So folks may have heard it before, but it was essentially, I was 17 years old. I was on a date with a girl that I was not really dating, but like we weren't in an official relationship, but I liked her. I was pursuing her, that kind of thing. Was very nervous on this date. There was some uncertainty around the relationship where things were going, and I didn't have a lot of experience in the relationship field. So I got really nervous, essentially had a panic attack on that date. And the date went real sideways real quick. Like, we kind of had this conversation where we broke up, even though we weren't officially dating, that kind of thing. And so that was a moment where I was like, I don't exactly know what anxiety is. I don't know even what I would call that episode that I just had, but that was painful. And, I really wanted this relationship to work out. So not just the physical and mental experience of whatever this anxiety thing was painful, but also then I'm dealing with the fallout of now I don't have this relationship that I was interested in, right? Fast forward 6 months later, I go off to college. I had spent a lot of time analyzing, dissecting that moment from 6 months ago where I had the panic attack, and really like the analysis piece was more like a rumination, right? Of, okay, that was so horrible. I want to avoid something like that happening again at all costs, and not really doing anything to prevent myself from experiencing that thing, just sort of like looking around every corner, being like anxiety or nervousness, where are you? How do I ward you off? But again, like not really coming up with any tactics, just living in fear of that sort of thing happening again. So I go off to college. This is now 6 months later from the original episode. I meet another girl that I like, but this is in college instead of high school. Lo and behold, we have, sort of like a little date interaction kind of thing. And I have a panic attack in front of her, and she didn't, this is not to speak poorly of her. It's just like kind of what happened, right? She had a couple drinks that night, what did not receive the panic attack so well, yelled at me, called me a bunch of names and ran off. And, again, it's not like I know this person. She's a good person. It's not meant to be like critical of her. Just my experience, right? Is here I am yet again, second panic attack in front of a girl that I like, thinking to myself, oh my goodness, like what was that? Again, with the nervousness, the anxiety, I still didn't have the lexicon. I sure as heck didn't have any tools to be able to work through this stuff. I went to bed that night. I was completely embarrassed, frustrated, in despair, right? Thinking to myself as an 18-year-old kid, like, how is a relationship ever going to work out if this is what happens every time? And so my brain kind of started to associate dating or relationships with this nervousness thing and pain and failure, right? And so I woke up that next morning and I was just like, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know what to call these things other than I was insanely nervous. My heart was racing out of my chest. I couldn't think, that sort of thing. And I said, something has to change from the standpoint of I have to go figure out what this is or what this was, and I need to deal with it. I need to come up with tactics for managing it. It was the beginning of a long journey, but that's how I got into it. And that's really like, when I look back and I say, okay, I eventually wrote a couple books and all that. If not for those couple episodes, I mean, maybe it would have been something else, but those were the main things that got me into this journey.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for everybody when they say, something has to change. Like, I can't keep going on the way it's been going, and I think that that's a huge piece that people get to, and sometimes they struggle with how to get going. That is when you don't know or you don't really have an idea and, somebody's telling you one thing and somebody else is telling you something else, and it does work a little different for everybody. You've got to find the place for you. But I think, you talked about the title of your book and stuff, that get out of your head is probably a big key component to that. And so I would love to hear like how you came to that point. And then just for somebody who might be stuck in that loop that is like something needs a change, but then they keep doing the same thing over and over again. What would be something like that first step to break that cycle too? I know that's kind of two questions, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I want to address there, right? So I guess the first thing to talk about from a very high level is, unfortunately, like there needs to be that moment, right? There needs to basically be enough pain to get you to have to try to find some leverage over yourself. For example, if you give a speech in front of your math class and you're nervous, but you get through it, or, you have a couple hiccups, but it goes okay, like that's not enough to be the impetus to push you into finding something, right? So sadly, there kind of has to be something that is monumental enough, and maybe monumental is the wrong word, but strong enough emotionally to push you into finding a solution, right? Because if you don't have a problem, why go looking for a solution? I guess another piece that I wanted to cover there, right, is like getting stuck in that spiral or in that cycle, and also like thinking about, how do you get out of it, right? So one way that I would answer this question is like, for me personally, and I think a lot of folks as well, my anxiety tends to manifest itself both as social anxiety, but also as OCD. And with OCD, right? So you have obsessive compulsive disorder. One thing that is like really tricky is OCD doesn't get the same, it certainly doesn't have the same conversation around it as general anxiety or depression or anything like that. And a lot of us think that that OCD is just this tapping disorder, right? Where we're counting things, we're
right.
tapping a certain number of
Mhm.
times. That's like the most superficial analysis of it. OCD is really being trapped in your own mind in this cycle of, so if we break it down, right, you have the obsession, which is essentially you get these thoughts that come in and you don't know how to deal with them or you don't want to deal with them. So it's an intrusive thought maybe, right? So in my case, it would be, I'm going to go on another date and I'm going to have a panic attack. And that thought says to me, you need to deal with me right now. And then the compulsion piece is some sort of behavior that you do in response to the intrusive thought that tries to, on some surface level deal with the obsession, right? So this is where the cycle or the spiral comes in, which is basically you have that intrusive thought, and then maybe, you run some sort of creative visualization process to counteract the intrusive thought. So again, just giving an example, I would say I'm going to go, I have this thought of I'm going to go on another date, I'm going to have another panic attack. My compulsion then becomes I'm going to visualize myself being on that date, not being nervous, not being anxious, all of that, right? The issue is when you go to think about something that you're already afraid of, you're going to build more fear in the body, right? And then eventually another intrusive thought is going to come in and you're going to get stuck in that cycle of thought and fear and thought and fear and thought and fear. So why, I give that preamble, and also like this leads us back to get out of your head, right? Is the only way to reliably break out of that cycle is to say, I'm not going to deal with the intrusive thoughts anymore. I'm not going to give any weight to them. I'm not going to consider them. I'm not going to entertain them. Now, that's obviously very hard to do. The first thing is like you have to give yourself permission to do
Right.
that. And how you do that is you say, okay, I've read literature, I've talked to somebody, I've talked to a therapist, I've listened to a podcast, what have you. And that resource has told me that these intrusive thoughts are essentially nothing, right? We have many thoughts on a given basis, on a given day. And any one of those thoughts, most of them aren't real. Most of them are negative. They're not like things saying to you, this is exactly how reality is right now. It's some sort of fear laced projection off into the future, right? So you have to be able to come to terms with that and say, I give myself permission to not do that thing, to not go into the compulsion when I experience the obsession, right? And
Mhm.
then the second piece is, even though you're going to know that you can do that, it's very hard to not replace the spiral with something else. Like if you, what I often say, right, is like you can tell yourself you're not going to eat junk food, but if you don't replace the junk food with something else, you're going to go back into the junk food, right? So you really
Yep.
need to go to the grocery store, so to speak, go buy some healthy food and be like, when I'm hungry, I'm going to reach for the healthier food. So the get out of your head moniker and all the tactics that I list within that are basically that process or that ethos, right? Is saying give yourself permission to get out of your head because it's okay to do so. You don't need to fight the thoughts. And then here are some tactics that will help you or, facilitate you in doing such a thing.
Yeah, and I love that because get out of your head is such a, like, I don't know, I can just envision it for me, like, okay, yeah, I've got all these thoughts racing and running around, and I've gotta step out it to kinda gain that perspective. What you're not saying is just get over yourself because that's not helpful, um, which is important, and some people will tell you that, and that's not fun. So I hit that because it's the same thing if people are like, "Well, just take care of yourself and everything will just figure it out itself." And I'm like, "That's not how it works either," because it does take hard work to come out of that anxiety or depression or work through OCD and managing those different things that you might struggle with. So what for you does that look like? Like self-care. I know that that's kind of like a trendy word. But it's really just taking care of yourself. What does that look like for you even in those places of like low motivation, people who are stuck in that cycle where they maybe don't have as much push to be able to step out of that. What's that something like that that looks for you?
Yeah, there's also like as with the last question, there's so much that I want to talk about. I'll try to keep it brief, and just pick a lane here. I guess where I'll focus on for right now, and obviously we can talk about more later, is thinking about the anxiety management. So when you read a book about anxiety, you talk to a therapist about anxiety, you will find that there's a strong connection between anxiety and the sympathetic nervous system, right? So the
Okay.
fight or flight response or fight or flight nervous system in the body. So once you see that connection, you can kind of say to yourself, okay, if my sympathetic nervous system is perpetually revved up or I'm living in a perpetually heightened state, then I am more likely to experience anxiety. Not only higher levels of anxiety, but also anxiety more often, right? And so you also think about like the way that the world operates, and it obviously depends on where every listener is in their own journey. But I think for most of us, right, if you live in the US and if you live in a city, you would probably say that life is pretty hectic, right? You know, you go to school or you have a job. You probably have a lot of other commitments, family commitments, social commitments, maybe a significant other, maybe you have a side hustle, a bunch of different things, right? So there are always competing for our attention, and there are so many tasks to do, right? It's like people will always say that the difficulty of a to-do list is you never finish it. It just keeps getting added to, right? So a lot of anxiety management for me, going off of this thread, or going along this thread, is thinking about the stress management piece, is saying, okay, if you are constantly overtaxed, if your to-do list is always super long, if you are always in go mode, or if you are always quote unquote on, then your sympathetic nervous system is going to be a little bit more revved up than you would like it to be. And then when these other stressors or these other anxiety provoking things come across your path, they're going to tip you into anxiety more easily than we'd otherwise like. And so for me, a lot of anxiety management is the stress piece of saying, I need to make sure that I keep my sympathetic nervous system at a normal level, right? There's a lot of people out there that will say that we essentially live in like a state of chronic stress, right? And when we're in that state, again, it's kind of along the same lines. Our sympathetic nervous system is revved up, and then something else comes along, and maybe we get a startle response or whatever, right? We're more easy to react and more easy to go into anxiety. So for me, a lot of it is taking those pauses, right? Like making sure that it doesn't happen every day for me, but it's like when I can, doing some meditation, putting my phone away and like going and standing on grass and not listening to music,
Yes.
not listening to a podcast, getting away from the technology for a little bit. Because, again, if you're in school or you have a job, you could very well be on your phone or your computer for like 95% of the day. And even
Yep.
though like not everything that comes in front of a screen is stress inducing, a lot of it is, right? Especially if you work for an organization and you get like 10 slacks every 10 minutes, that is
Mhm.
kind of stressful, So again, for me, it's getting those pauses, it's taking the breaks, it's prioritizing the self-care a little bit. And for me, some of those things are like just like taking 10 minutes out of the day and sitting on my couch and doing nothing. It is maybe listening to one of my favorite songs for, one or two plays,
Yeah.
drinking some chamomile tea, taking a quick meditation or breath work pause. It's really important because like wherever your baseline is for your sympathetic nervous system, like it's essentially that like whenever those stressors come on, you're reacting from that baseline. And if that baseline is too high, that means you're getting into anxiety too often. So that's how I like to frame that overall task. It's very vague, and it's also like it's hard to describe because it's your entire life. But I think it's important for folks to think about this, right? Because there are times where you may say to yourself, like, I'm anxious all the time. I have no idea what to do. And your life, right, sort of becomes the proverbial water that you swim in. And there's that David Foster Wallace quote where there's two fish, swimming along, and one of them says to the other, like, something about water. And the other fish says, what's water? Right. So it's like your
Yeah.
environment, your lifestyle becomes that thing that you swim in that you don't even realize is there. The more that you put attention and mindfulness on that thing and make it such that it's a less stressful environment, the better you're going to do with anxiety.
I think it's such a good, like, just acknowledgement for people to recognize that it is different for everybody, that those stressors are going to hit differently. I had a friend tell me once, and it stuck with me ever since. And she was talking about it's the way that things like activate those feelings in you or activate those things. And I loved that word activate because I'm like, oh, yeah, because it's there. But like those, text messages or like our phones we're always on them, that it's constantly with us, and we were not created to be at constant like to be able to be reached constantly. But we are at this point, and that's the way the world is. And so being really intentional and knowing if that like, oh, okay, if I get an email from my boss or I get a text from this certain person, like I know that's going to activate those feelings. So I play with do not disturb a lot, throw that on my phone because it helps me not to, have that. And so knowing those things, it does help you. in whatever that healing journey looks like. And I think there's a lot of pieces that go into that. I know I have a friend that also talks about, movement, like stretching. Um, they love stretching. Stretching is great for our body and it's great for your mental health too. Things like that and breath work. Are those any other things that you kind of go to? Those are really important in your own like personal life, or things that other people, just as maybe a helpful hint for people who are listening.
Yeah, I would say that for me personally, exercise is the big one. Going back to sort of the psychology lens, right? And saying that, the body was designed to deal with immediate stressors, right? Not these chronic stressors, the world that we currently live in. The challenge is like we have not real lions and real tigers in front of us on a daily basis, but we have abstractions of them and many of them, right? So the same primitive system that was designed to help us find safety in the face of a tiger is now going off perpetually when we are, getting all those text messages, getting all those slacks, reading harrowing news lines and whatnot. Uh, News headlines, I think, is what I was trying to say there. Um, the system inside of you that is trying to help you or was designed to get you into safety, right? It's like when those chemicals secrete and go into your bloodstream, they are saying, move your body, run away, right? And obviously, like if you're in a meeting, a staff meeting or whatever, you can't always run away, but you can still do some exercise, like, during the downtime of the day. And so, when you get that exercise, right, you're appeasing your brain and basically sending a message back to, your HPA axis and also your amygdala to be like, dude, turn off the cortisol, turn off the adrenaline. We got this for now. So yeah, I love exercise, not just because of all of that, but also, you throw in some of your favorite music, you go for a run, you lift some weights or whatever, you get some good feelings going. I want to say, right, it's like, L-tryptophan releases when you lift weights, and that's kind of the precursor of serotonin. Serotonin is casually known as like the happiness molecule. So there's all sorts of good benefits of exercising, not just physical, but absolutely on the mental health side.
You said earlier too, like basically go touch grass. Like that's a grounding. Some people, it's a really common word now. I feel like a lot of people understand that to a point, but using the different techniques that are, and you can find them out everywhere pretty much anymore. But like different ways to ground yourself, because if you are in that like heightened state of stress, then it's hard to see anything other than that. I've related it a lot to like racehorses when they wear blinders. It's like they only see that little pinpoint right in front of them. And that's like our stress. That's everything that's like creating chaos around us. We got to kind of take those blinders off to see, the whole track, right? So that's I love those things. And those are sometimes so simple, and you don't always think that they'll make a huge difference, but you keep at it, you keep doing those things, you keep adding those into your life, you create those habits, really does make a huge difference in the long run. Let's flip a little bit and let's talk a little bit about maybe some mental health myths that you wish could retire, that you wish could be thrown out the window. Just something that you're like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I usually go back to the common ones, I guess the first one being that, like, struggles on the mental health front are weaknesses, right? And I always beat this drum of everything that we just talked about, right? Is the HPA axis, the amygdala, the sympathetic nervous system, all of that was designed to help get you to safety amid threatening situations, right? And so if we then say, like, as we did previously, the sympathetic nervous system and anxiety are closely tied together, or anxiety kind of grows out of the sympathetic nervous system, if you will, then you actually look and you say, okay, if people are saying anxiety is a weakness, it's literally a survival mechanism. That's what it is. The challenge, the real challenge, and the nuance is that uh, that survival mechanism doesn't serve us as well now as it used to. So that's kind of the first mental health myth that I think is worth covering. Another quick one, right? A common one is just, people will say like depression is sadness. There is a grain of truth to that, right? Somebody who is very sad could very well be depressed, and somebody who is depressed may very well be very sad. But there's also like another aspect of depression or manifestation of depression is called anhedonia, which is the inability to feel pleasure. And so, somebody who says, I don't want to go to the baseball stadium and watch the Red Sox. I don't want to go to the beach with my friends. I don't want to go to the bar. All those things that they used to enjoy, they don't see the joy in those things anymore. And so, a lot of what we talk about right on the mental health front is you had mentioned earlier of you said like, when people say to you like, just manage yourself better or just kind of get over yourself or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Is obviously those things that people hurl towards us, like those are not helpful.
Right.
Um, we need a lot more grace in the space. I think obviously we have some, but we need more grace to say like, sure, even if depression is sadness, or even if this person is really sad, they might also be going through, this period of anhedonia where they're like, dude, I don't want to go hang out with my
Yeah.
friends. I don't want to do all the things I used to do because my brain is like broken right now, right? I don't experience joy. I don't feel joy in all the moments that I used to. And so when we have a more honest dialogue around that kind of thing and people can see into that, they're like, okay, you're not just, this isn't like your favorite team lost a game and you're down for a day. This is like you're down for a while and you might be down real bad. So I think sometimes growing the conversation in that context and just letting people know that there are nuances to these things, and a lot of the times what people really just need is support. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, and it's been so long that there was just not an understanding of a lot of areas of mental health, and to be honest, we still have a lot to learn probably. But like now that the conversation has happened, there are more people talking about it. That's been incredible. Because like I grew up in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was very taboo to talk about. So I love that we're talking about it, like things like this, like the podcast and books and all the different things. And so being able to have that is wonderful. And having these tools like we talked about with just using exercise and using other ways to help get rid of this stress and to work through that and manage that anxiety and depression. One big piece that I think we might be missing is vulnerability. Because if you can't be vulnerable, if you can't share your struggles, that doesn't mean you share them with everybody. You don't have to. Like you wrote a book, you shared all these things. That doesn't have to be for everybody because I'm always telling people make sure you're sharing it with a safe person. But it's so important to be able to talk about it. I would just love to hear kind of your thoughts into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability is a big piece. I think just to, before I get started, right, I think one thing that you touched upon that I kind of want to just put out there is we tend to look at things as black and white, right?
Mhm.
Just in general, where we may hear the word vulnerability and think to ourselves, I need to go on the roof of my house and scream about all my problems to everybody in the
Right.
town, right?
Mhm.
Vulnerability is just like most things in life. It is a gradient. You can find yourself on, the left side or the right side. That has nothing to do with politics, obviously.
Right.
You have to decide where you feel comfortable, how far down the path of vulnerability you feel like going. And I would say that, like, don't feel pressured to go all the way down it right away. Start small, have a conversation with, a loved one, a trusted friend, see where you get from there, continue the conversation, grow the conversation if you want to. That's my preamble. The piece that I really wanted to get into and like why vulnerability is so important is there's a popular mental health quote that I always pull out, which is, you are only as sick as your secrets. And
Mhm.
when you think about that one, right, it's like if you have some problem that you are stuffing down, that you are unwilling to put into the light, that you are unwilling to talk about and address, like you're giving that thing a lot of power over you. And you are also, therefore, not actually dealing with it. So the vulnerability piece is to open up and say, and honestly, it might be vulnerability with yourself
Yeah.
to say, I deal with this thing. It is okay. I'm going to go find help. I'm going to go work on it. The more that you stuff it down, the more it grows inside of you. And maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 20 years from now, but that thing's going to come out at some point and it's not going to be
Mhm.
pretty. So the
Yeah.
vulnerability piece is to say, the sooner you feel comfortable doing that in small doses, the sooner you will start to make progress and that thing won't have as much power over you anymore.
So I counsel people and that's what I see all the time is the more they talk about it, I'm like, I'm just here listening. but you talk through it and they're like, I'm like, what helps the most? They're like, just talking about it. I'm like, I know, because that's literally all I'm here to do. And so I think that that's such an important thing. And it can be really scary for people because especially if you grew up and you believe that vulnerability wasn't like something to be shared, like those aren't things you talk about, you just push them away. Like you said, stuff them down. Like we don't share that, but to have a safe space to do that, like you said, in small doses to walk through that, it really does walk you through your healing journey and gets you to a place where no, it doesn't mean your anxiety is gone forever. It doesn't mean any of that. It just, you have ways to manage it. You know what activates it so that you can work around that. You can find ways to live this life fully. And it's so important. And I'm like, those things I'll be like, say over and over. And I feel like I say every time on a podcast, I'm like, talk to somebody, share pieces and that will help you along your journey. I would love just to kind of wrap it up with just any last thoughts, anything that you just kind of want to add to this.
What I think is a good segue at the moment is this idea, right? Is we have these ideas in our minds sometime of, these statements of "I'll be happy when," right? As in, I'll get that new car, I'll finally be happy. I'll get that new house, I'll finally be happy. Or I will learn all of these things and I will never experience anxiety again. A lot of this is black and white thinking in a new form, right? And when you have, like, I'm trying not to say this from a place of ego. When you have enough experience, life experience, or you go through enough things, you start to unmask these things, right? And you say, "Oh yeah, that really is kind of black and white thinking." It's more of that gradient, right? So folks will again say, "Hey, I want to learn all these things and never experience anxiety again." In reality, right? You're like, life has problems. It's full of
Yeah.
problems. The only people that don't have any problems are the dead ones. And so what we're looking to do, right, is not to never experience anxiety again. We are looking to accumulate enough tools in our toolkit such that we become more proficient with it, right? And as we progress through life and we experience new challenges and new situations, we find new and novel ways to take those tools out and apply them to these new situations.
Yeah. I think that is a great way to end it. Thank you for being on this. And I will put your links in the show notes so that people can find your book. They can connect with you, however, so that they can follow along.
Thanks, Megan. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Megan. Remember, you are not alone. Seeking help is a sign of strength, and taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. We'll see you next time for more honest conversations.